Hi, folks. Welcome to Jazz Room at Home. This is the sitting in portion of the Jazz Room concert. My name is Pete McGuinness. I'm one of the jazz professors at William Paterson University, one of the co-hosts of the Jazz Room concert series. And today, for this afternoon's Jazz Room concert, I have the pleasure of interviewing our guest artist for this afternoon, Mr. John Fedchock. John and I go way back. We've known each other for many, many years. Some of you know I played trombone professionally for quite a while, and there were many, many nights and days I sat next to this gentleman, very honored to do so in big bands, Broadway shows, record dates, and it was really a gas having much of my trombone career next to this guy. He's one of the, when you're up close and personal with someone like that, you know they're a total class act, and I can totally tell you that. John is, at this point in his career, considered one of the foremost jazz trombone players on the scene, and maybe historically so too. John has done so much as a jazz trombone soloist, just a player in various famous big band trombone sections, including his own big band. He first made his real splash on the scene nationally and internationally as the lead trombonist, featured soloist, and then later musical director and principal arranger for the Woody Herman Orchestra in the 1980s. Shortly thereafter, in New York City, moving on to starting his own big band, the John Fedchock New York Big Band, where once again being a soloist, composer, arranger, and band leader, playing with a number of different jazz ensembles. The list is way too long. Carnegie Hall Jazz Orchestra under the direction of John Fadis. So many big bands, they're countless. And his own big band has gone on to really make quite a splash with a number of records, and one of the top premier jazz big bands in the country, one of the recognized groups. He's always near or on the top of all the reader and critics polls every year for jazz trombone, so this is a real voice on the instrument after all these years. Really established himself as a historically important jazz trombonist. But people think of John as a soloist and a big band leader, but oftentimes they forget that he leads small groups. He's done a number of recordings leading a quartet, and we're going to be talking a bit about today a specific group that he's had for many, many years, besides the big band and other things, his Sextet, 3 horns and 3 rhythm. And this is a group that has done a number of records as well. This is the group you're going to see today at 4 o'clock, the John Fedchock New York Sextet, 3-horn lineup. And we have Scott Wendholt on the trumpet chair, and Walt Weiskopf holding down the tenor sax chair, and John in there on the trombone. And we'll talk about the rest of the band as we get into the details of what's going to happen today and what this group's music is going to be. So, John, welcome to Jazz Room.
Thanks, Pete. Really great to be here.
Well, man, I just have to say, this is so much fun. We've been trying to get you on the Jazz Room for a very long time. We have this wish list. It's like, okay, we had a trombone. We got to wait a year on this. Blah, blah, blah. So it's like it's just nice that we were able to fit it in. And you're on stage. Your group is performing on the Shea Auditorium stage, even though there won't be an audience, of course, right now because of the COVID restrictions. But you will be on the stage, and folks at home will be hearing you and seeing you. There's so much to talk about. I think anyone who's a fan of yours, whether it be your trombone playing or your composing, arranging, is probably very curious to learn a little bit about kind of your early years before you made that big splash with Woody Herman, or maybe even there were splashes I don't even know about before that. You're originally from the state of Ohio.
Yeah, I grew up in the Cleveland area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and, went to school after high school. I got interested in jazz early high school years, end of middle school and into high school. But none of my family, my parents were not musicians or anything, so I wasn't like immersed in the art form early on. So I had to pick things up slowly as I gained interest in it. But I had an uncle who, when I was 12 or 13, said, if you're going to play trombone, you need to know who Tommy Dorsey is. So he gave me a double album set of Tommy Dorsey big band stuff, which got me kind of excited. But I realized it was, from the 40s. It wasn't until, early 70s, that in my high school years, that Woody Herman came to my school and did a concert in a clinic. And at the time, I just thought it was going to be one of those types of old 40s big bands thing. And they were playing Chick Corea and John Coltrane and pop music from the time. And everybody in the band was in their 20s. So it was like, wow, it was like a revelation that this is still like a living and breathing art form, and it might be something I could take part in. So it was very inspiring.
I think one of their I just saw a YouTube thing recently of the early 70s or mid 70s, and they were playing La Fiesta, thinking about the passing of Chick Corea. So they were very pertinent to what was happening.
Yeah, they played that night, and eventually, when I did join the band, that was something we played every night for about 3 or 4 years. And yeah, Woody loved Chick's music. He loved the fact that it translated well to the big band in the right hands. And he just thought it was a current thing that wasn't so outlandishly avant-garde that it wouldn't deter some of his, older clientele, I guess you could say. So eventually, as we started playing new music during the time I was on the band in the 80s, that tune kind of faded from the regular set list. So toward the end of my time on the band, and consequently the end of Woody's life, on his last album, I did an arrangement of one of Chick's tunes for that album, and Woody would play it every night because he just wanted to really support Chick's music.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
well, it was very melodic music too, and even thinking of La Fiesta, it's got a melody that has a real catch to it.
Sure.
Got that melodic quality to it too.
But he also recorded Spain, and he actually commissioned Chick to write a suite for Woody's band. Wow. It's an entire side of an LP. It's called Suite for Hot Band. And for anybody who hasn't heard it, I would look for that. I'm sure it's somewhere on YouTube or something to check out. It's really fantastic writing and very unique big band writing that you wouldn't expect. It sounds like Chick playing a big band, basically.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, so Woody came to your school. In fact, what's funny, John, is when I was in high school in 1980, I saw you with Woody's band.
Okay.
In Hartford, Connecticut. You guys were doing an outdoor summer thing, and you and I think probably Paul McKee or somebody, and you were both up on the mic, and I said, this was one of those moments where like, I want to play in big bands too. I want to play in great big bands.
Sure, it's like, that looks like fun. And when I first saw the band, Jim Pugh was the soloist, and Woody loved Jim. And so he was up there 6-7 times through the course of the night. So it's like, wow, the trombone players are getting a lot of heat on this band. So that was also inspiring, because a lot of the other bands, you'd maybe be lucky to see one or two chorus, blues choruses or something. But on Woody's band, it was like flat out features and a lot of exposure in a variety of styles, which was really cool.
I wonder if that's because he was a product of the swing era, and there were so many trombone players in the swing era that were prominent, and he remembers that the voice of the trombone was a voice.
Well, I also think that Woody knew talent when he heard it, and he anybody that was a great trombone player at the time went through that band. I mean, you had Irby Green, Carl Fontana. Strangely enough, a lot of people don't know this, but Brookmeyer played on one of Woody's albums. Rossellino played on the band for a short time. There were a lot of unbelievable soloists that went through that band, and Woody realized that it wasn't just about the instrument, it was about the musician and what they could express.
God, that's a whole litany of jazz trombone history right there.
I mean, you think about it, like Frank Rehack and Bobby Burgess, like all these fantastic players that went through the band.
So that's wonderful. I mean, so it made an impact on you when you were young, and you had your sights. I don't know if you had your sights at that point in your life to say that's the gig I'm going to get.
Well, that was like the ultimate thing. Like that was something I had my sights set on, but I wasn't sure I was going to get to that point. But I kind of geared my life to little short-term goals that might help me get to that level.
Right. So now you're still in Ohio, and you went to college there.
Yeah, I went to Ohio State University, and I luck of the draw, I showed up at the school at the time when there were just tons of great jazz musicians there. It was like just the timing was right. There was enough people there super talented people that were there at the same time. With that in mind, though, I went to Ohio State and I did not get into any ensembles as a freshman. I mean, I didn't even get in the marching band. So I was devastated, but that was that much more inspiring. So every day at lunchtime, I would go and listen to the big band rehearse, just not only for the inspiration, but also just to kind of take in what they were doing and try to learn, from the audience a little bit. And about halfway through my freshman year, somebody left to go student teach, and they had auditions for the open chair, and that's when I got in.
Cool. And you were probably very happy. I mean, gratified that you.
Yeah, I mean, I was still a kid. I was still like, 19 years old, whatever. But it felt like I was going the right direction. Even at the end of that year, though, when I did my jury I was a music education major. I did my jury at the end of the year, and they were almost going to drop me from the music program. So that's where I was in the stage of development. But fortunately, my teacher at the time, his name was Joseph Ducci, he knew where my heart was and where my drive was, and he stood up for me. It was his first year teaching at the school, and he stood up to all the other brass faculty and said that I should stay on. And he actually was nice enough to tell me about that after all this deliberation. And then that summer, from then on, it was like 5-6 hours a day practicing.
Wow, I would love to have been a fly on the wall watching those practice sessions.
Oh, I didn't know what I was doing, but I was just practicing. It was just.
Well, you were doing something clearly, because you got so much ability on the instrument, clearly, tremendous amount. So you finished up your time in Ohio, but you made your way from there directly to Eastman? Was that what happened?
Yeah, I wanted to go to Eastman for grad school because all through the 70s, Woody was getting his trombone players from Eastman.
Right.
Starting with Jim Pugh and Birch Johnson and Dale Kirkland and Art Linsner and Jim Daniels and Nelson Hines and Gene Smith. All these folks, they were all from Eastman at the time. So I thought there's something there that I need to get to Eastman somehow. So that was one of those short-term goals along the way. Right. During my 4 years of undergrad, I want to get good enough that I can get into Eastman. And I kind of squeaked by getting into Eastman, and as a jazz studies major, master's degree program in performance.
Right.
And I was lucky enough to study with John Marcellus, who's one of the great trombone teachers ever.
I know who he is.
And study arranging with Ray Wright,
who
was one of the greatest. I remember Ray telling me stories about Duke Ellington calling him for advice about arranging. That's pretty heavy,
That's very heavy.
So I was only there for a year, and during the end of that year, Woody's band came through Rochester, and some of the folks that I knew at Eastman knew people that were traveling on Woody's band, and we went to the concert, and I gave them a tape of my playing. I said I'd love to play in the band, and sometime in July, or actually end of June, I got a call. So I had been doing that. That was another thing I was doing, because I'm very hard on myself musically. So anytime I played something that I thought was good, I would try to get a tape of it, a recording of it. And I compiled a tape of all my favorite performances that I kind of kept updating as kind of a audio resume.
Yeah, right. Smart.
So when Woody's band came through, I laid a tape of me, just a copy of that tape, on the people that were the lead trombone player, Gene Smith, at the time.
Now that's quite a story, because he didn't know you, but you said you knew some people that knew him, so you had like a kind of an in.
Yeah.
You talked to Gene for me, and can I just meet him? Would you introduce me to him, kind of thing?
Yeah, that's exactly. And I talked to him for, maybe 5 minutes and gave him the tape. And then later on in the year, they passed through New York City, and me and a buddy of mine from college flew to New York from Rochester. At that time, you could get a $50 flight to New York. We flew to New York to hear Woody's band and hang out with Gene, and that was it. Last time I saw him, and then in July, he called and said someone's leaving the band. They called it like 4 a.m. because they were in LA, and the time difference. But someone just gave their notice, and he wanted to make sure that by the time July 6th, which was the next date, came up, that they had a player. So I got a call at 4 a.m. I was actually at my parents' house, and that was the first time I had a glass of scotch with my father. He said, because it was the middle of the night, I was all hyped up. Okay, here you go, kid. So it was kind of a nice moment, really. Yeah. So my first day was July 6, 1980.
Yeah, it was a defining moment. I mean, one of the dream gigs of your life, and here you got the call at 4 a.m. for it. Not always the way. 4 a.m.
Right.
I actually got called to do the band, and it was of course after Woody had passed on, and I was just filling in for a gentleman named Joel something, and
Joel
it was one of those things where he got ill all of a sudden. I had a gig the next day in like Arizona, and I got a phone call at whatever time, 6 a.m, and I said, "Can you be on a plane this afternoon?"
Yeah.
To fly out, and I missed the first gig because there was weather. So they were expecting me to fly in, get from the airport, get to the sound check, get to the gig, and the plane was circling because there was weather.
Nice.
And I think I used one of those phones in the airplane, and I was calling Mike Brignola or something, like, "Listen, I'm in real trouble here, and the plane's not landing."
Yeah.
I
was really lucky. My first gig was an outdoor park gig. It was a 4-hour. It was like 3 concert sets in a park. So we basically played most everything in the concert book. But fortunately for me, I was a big fan of the band. I had listened to the music for years and years. So I actually had some of the stuff already memorized. So I was ready to go. That was a big help.
Oh yeah. I'm sure you had to have a little rehearsal and fanfare for the common man, how the trombones.
No, well, there was no time. It was the same thing. So I just kind of went with it, but I knew it, so it was,
There's this huge thing in this arrangement of fanfare for the common man, which turns into a funky chart, of course, for the viewers that don't know. And this is a very popular closer for the Woody Herman show. But the trombones start in a very symphonic way, but it's out of nowhere. There's no conductor, so it's like it's usually when I was with the band, John, and you were playing it, so it was kind of up to you a little bit to just kind of give us a little wink nod about
visual
the entrance. And we would try and minimize it so the audience thinks it's all magic.
And that piece was actually inspired by that whole entity of Eastman people coming into Woody's band. Woody heard, I'm not sure who it was, but some of those Eastman guys playing it to warm up or just on the sidelines. And he asked Gary Anderson to write an arrangement of it. And at the time, it was the same time that Diodato had a funk arrangement of that tune. So it went hand in hand.
Yeah, also did like the that was their Zarathustra thing too. Funky guitar and all that.
Yeah.
Right. Again, Woody's band just seemed to like be very in touch with the times, especially during the 70s. He like nailed it.
I think it was due to the fact that he really, Stan Kenton started this whole jazz education thing with the Kenton clinics and all that. And Woody realized that that's the only way you can cultivate a new audience is go to the younger people. Otherwise, they're just going to die off, So, so we did a lot of college and high school clinics and played for kids a lot. And that's why he wanted us to always do an afternoon clinic with the kids, because he thought it was really important to not only educate them about what needs to be done to play better, but also just to kind of foster a new following.
Yeah, because, we think now about the 70s. That's quite a while ago.
Yeah.
So it's like, if 40, 50 years ago from the 70s, is like before ragtime or something. I always think of that to myself, like these chunks of time kind of thing.
Oh, so I do too. You think people are still studying John Coltrane or Charlie Parker in the 50s, right?
Right.
That's 60 years ago, right?
Right.
So think about when I was a kid.
Right.
If I in the 1960s and 70s, I would have been listening to like Dixieland basically, and I did, but not primarily,
Cakewalks.
Yeah. So it's interesting, really interesting.
John Philip Sousa's marching band.
Yeah. But Woody really, anytime there was something new on TV, and when MTV came out, he wanted to like dial into anything that could connect him to a younger audience.
It's so interesting because he was a product of the swing era, you know. I mean, Miles was kind of like that. He was always changing, trying to be current. A lot
Yeah,
of cats were not, though. I mean, I think Basie's band tried a bit to
sure,
occasionally do some funky things, but you know, it never was going to be. It wasn't
right.
going to be like what Woody's band did or what
But I
Miles.
think Woody. The thing about Woody's band is he left it to the band to kind of shape how the particular era was going to go. I mean, he wanted people that could be more versatile. So he wasn't just thinking about guys that were real swingers. He wanted people that could be versatile enough to play more open or to play even eighth stuff or Latin things or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And that also was inspired by the writers too. So
Mm-hmm.
he always let the writing and the strong soloists kind of lead the way to create the face of the band during that particular era, which was really kind of cool. He didn't really say it has to be this. He'd find talent and let it kind of evolve into what it was.
Mm-hmm. What I think is so great about Woody's book and his band and his history is as much, you know, Woody, it seemed like Woody, unlike Buddy Rich, who was like so in the front of every chart, it just seemed like he was the focus of so much of the music, which is great because he's a virtuoso drummer. So he's showing off his drumming and people come to see him because he's a drummer. He's very exciting.
Sure.
It seemed like Woody, although which is interesting about what you're saying is he helped sort of guide the direction of the book in terms of reaching out to the cats in the band, suggesting some things that were contemporary of the time. It seemed more to me the book. I mean, even with Basie's band, Basie was always central to the writing. He's always in there, even if he's just kerplunk a little bit.
Yeah.
He's always like part of the DNA of any arrangement. You know, Woody's in there too, but I think that the book of Woody's band, you know, is as important and maybe sometimes even more important than himself as a soloist. Am I wrong? Because it has a stable of great writers.
Yeah, I think anybody who's anybody wrote for that band at some time. And what's interesting to me, and having played on the band for 7 years and playing all this music, you know, a book that was like this thick,
Yes.
they all had their own unique way of approaching it, but they all had a sound that sounded like Woody's band. So there was a unifying thread, even with really stylistically disparate styles of writing. There was something in there that held it to sound like Woody's band, and I believe it was due to Woody's. Even though he wasn't an arranger or anything, he would give subtle little suggestions that would kind of keep it within those confines, while letting someone expand from those confines.
Mm-hmm.
It was some kind of like unifying thing, because you hear a Bill Holman chart with Woody's band, it sounds like Bill Holman, but it also sounds like Woody's band.
Right.
And you hear, you know, Ralph Burns, it's going to sound like Woody's band. But if you hear Ralph Burns thing he wrote later, it does not sound like Woody's band.
That's
So it's really an interesting kind of a thing. Same with Neil Hefti and all those folks.
I just wonder if that's also the product of the swing era too. We keep coming back to that because he was, you know, the band that played the blues and all that.
Sure.
Of course, he reinvented himself when the bebop thing hit, which is another, you know, thing that a lot of bands did not do. They didn't have Four Brothers after they had, you know, Blue Flame.
Of course.
So it's, you know, which is quite a transformation, really, if you think about it.
But it's kind of similar to doing pop tunes. In other words, it was like, this is a new thing. How can we dial into this somehow with this band? And so he found the right people to write the right charts. He found Shorty Rogers. He found, you know, Jimmy Jufrey. You know, he found the right people to write the charts at the right time to reflect this sound that was a burgeoning thing at the time.
So when you joined the band as a trombone player, you started in the second chair, I think, initially,
Yes.
and you moved up to the lead chair, and you became one of the principal big soloists. You know, always having a big ballad feature and a lot of solos, as I recall. But you started writing for the band. So when you started writing for the band, and there's a ton of your music in the book now, especially during the 1980s, you wrote 2 or 3 albums worth of arrangements, I think, for the band.
Two albums minus a couple charts. Yeah.
Right, in 86 and 87, as I recall.
It was basically the last 2 albums that Woody ever played on.
Mm-hmm. And when you were writing, let's say the first few charts you were writing, you know, before you got to the point where you're writing entire albums worth of music for Woody Herman's band, when you started writing your, well, I'd love to hear about the first one you did, but so were you kind of channeling all your listening from all the years, all those great recordings you would sort of?
Of course, yeah, and my first chart I didn't write till over 2 years after I joined the band. Or actually, I'm sorry, almost 2 years, about a year and a half after I joined the band. Because I really, first and foremost, always wanted to be a trombone player.
Mm-hmm.
So that was where my focus was. And once we did a location gig, we did a 5-month location gig in New Orleans in basically November to, well, it might closer to 6 months, but November to May, or December to May, something like that, in 1981 to 82. And so everybody had apartments. We're all, we're playing the gig every night, which was great, but there was a lot of downtime. So I thought if I'm ever going to try to write something, this would be the time to do it. And at the time, the only writing background I had was beginning arranging 1 year with Ray Wright. So Ray hadn't written his book yet, Inside the Score, any of that. All I had was my notes from class. And that's what I based my first charts on. And the first chart I wrote, I brought in, we'd play the gig, it was like a 2.5-hour gig. And then I'd ask the guys, if you guys mind sticking around for an extra 30 minutes so we can, and they'd play 16 bars for me. So I'd listen to it. And at the time, John Otto was the pianist, who we just lost recently.
Right.
John, was the writer at the time for the band, principal arranger. And he would give me little thoughts. And he was also a student of Ray's. Mm-hmm. And over the course of, a few weeks, I kind of sewed together this arrangement of this Lou Donaldson tune called Fried Buzzard.
Okay. I know.
But that was basically my first charts were for Woody. I never had that, laboratory session where you could write stuff for a student group or, listen to things, pass or fail. You're writing for Woody Herman. So over a course of a few weeks, I'd bring in a soli or a brass section or whatever. And then I kind of knit them all together. And I asked Woody if he'd be interested in playing it on the gig. And he played it once and he liked it. And he started playing my music. So when John left the band, I was the only person on the band that was writing. And just because there was no one else, I became the guy. So it was kind of trial by fire. I had never done any kind of commission work or anything like that. I just, that was the first thing I ever wrote was just things I wrote for fun.
Well, it's kind of, you kind of, once again, like you talk about the step-by-step process, it's like, you're rehearsing a little bit with the band, you write one chart for the band, and then Woody's becoming familiar with the fact that you're a writer gradually, and then John Otto leaves the band, and then there you are.
Yeah. I think I'd written 3 things for the band at that point before John left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I played so much of your music. You're such a master. John and I have had long talks about composing, arranging, and the things we love. We have a lot of things we have in common in terms of what we like, and it's really, I'm a big fan of your writing as well.
The great thing about Woody's band was, like I said, all these great writers wrote for the band, and you'd play a chart and go, wow, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. How did he get that sound? I would just walk and look at the saxophone parts during the break, or look at what he wrote, how he voiced the trumpets. It was all right there. And I eventually became part of the setup crew, so I'd be there early and I'd leaf through the charts. And
wow!
So it was really cool.
That's funny. That's what Cecil Bridgewater, one of our arranging teachers, says. How he learned to write himself. He was on Thad Jones's band, of course, and he'd get there early and just sneak a look at the sax voicings, particularly the mysterious Thad Jones voice. He's like, what is this? And he'd have a piece of paper and he'd write the voicings down. And I don't think Thad was even aware he was doing this. Just figure the stuff out. Well, I just want to look at the clock a little bit here. And so you've got the stint on Woody's band, and clearly that really brought you to the national ear and eye, with all your solos and your writing. And, that put you in a position to settle in New York. And that's where I first met you right around 1990, 91, something.
Actually, I moved to New York in 87. My last gig on Woody's band was May 29th of 87. And we flew back. We were in Germany. And we flew back and landed in JFK, and I stayed.
And then
I'd always wanted to. And then when I moved to New York, I always wanted to be a player, of course, but But then I thought, how can I kind of perpetuate this great thing I've been a part of?
Right.
Because I always thought, well, all these great writers, I mean, with the exception of a couple whose names everybody knows, there were a lot of great writers that wrote for Woody's band. It's like, what happened to these guys? Why aren't they leading their own bands? They wrote really well, and I realize now it's a really hard thing to do. But it was something it was something I didn't want to abandon. I had no interest in writing for, sports music or commercial TV or soap operas or movies. That didn't interest me. I just wanted to write jazz and the things I like to do. Mm-hmm. So that was when I first put the band together.
Yeah. And you've gone on to lead your own big band as soloist with the band. I don't think you sit in the section with your band, do you? You do.
I do.
You do.
And I've found little ways to write myself in and out, so I have time to pop up and get in front and throw whatever cue I need to, and then I'm back in there. Because that was the other thing is I love playing in a trombone section. Why would I take myself out?
Right.
And have somebody else have that enjoyment? If I'm going through all the heartache and headache of having a big band, I want to
be in the band. I know.
Yeah, I want to be in the band. Yeah. So I made a point of that, and I just try to write things in a way that gives me the opportunity that when the band does need some direction, I'm able to hop up and give that, and then maybe come back in or stay out there, depending.
I think of all the times that you particularly more than I, but many times I've been in big bands where it's like you're supposed to be playing and you're supposed to be soloing, and the arranger gives you no time, and so you feel like, all right, I have a choice to make. Am I just going to blow off these 8 bars and not play and let the arrangement suffer so I can comfortably sit down in my chair, pick up my cup mute or whatever it is I'm supposed to do, or am I going to run back as fast as I can after my solo?
Exactly. Now, for me, I actually got used to the idea of allowing for that, because like writing optional notes, because on Woody's band had 5 trumpets. Bill Byrne was the 5th trumpet, but he was also the road manager and the straw boss and the paymaster and all that. So sometimes, get toward the end of the gig, he would just leave. Where's Bill? Oh, he's getting the money. It's like, okay, who's going to play? So you start to learn, there's a way to write a chart that includes everybody, but if certain people aren't there, it still works.
That's funny. You write music for the possibility that one of the cats in the band is going to get the money.
Yeah.
You don't learn that. That's what you learn from an inside person.
Yeah, right.
Well, okay, so I want to move on a little to, I know you've got so many experiences to talk about and backing up different people, leading your own big band and bringing that writing to your band. But I want to talk about this group that you are bringing to the stage today, your Sextet, because it apparently has much longer history than I knew. I thought it was more of a recent organization, and apparently it's
I was lucky enough. My first album I self-produced, paid for everything, but then I shopped it around to labels, which at the time was the thing to do. Is you can't get anywhere without the support of a label. Now everybody puts out anything they want on their own, and it's like a flood of music out there, good or bad or both.
Right.
But at the time, that was kind of the ceiling you'd hit. If you didn't have the backing or the support of a label, no one's going to hear your music. So I was really lucky to hook up with Reservoir Music, who had done a lot of really nice recordings throughout the 70s and 80s, and they were like a godsend, because they not only bought the first record, but then they paid for everything from then on until through the last album was in 2006, came out in 2007. So they not only paid for all the production and the manufacturing, but they also paid all the guys. They paid me. They paid mechanical royalties and all the things that you would expect, like you're supposed to have, but now seems to be more of a rarity to get that.
Only a rarity.
Yeah. But I was so lucky to get them, and they were really excited. And the first 2 albums got a lot of really nice press and exposure, and they both got 4.5 stars in Downbeat, and the whole thing. And they said, you know what, we'd like to do an album to feature your trombone playing. So let's put the big band on the side, and we'll just feature you. And I said, great. And they said, what would you like to do? And I said, well, I'd like to do, quartet, but maybe just so I could write a little bit, have maybe a quintet or a couple sextet tunes in there so I could write for three horns. And they said, great. So it was an album that came out in 2000, and it's called Hit the Bricks. And there are several tunes on there that have a three-horn front line and a rhythm section. And that did well too. And it just happened to be that there was a big financial thing in the US in the early 2000s, the stock market and everything. And people couldn't afford to be flying 16-piece big band across the country or to Europe or whatever. So I was starting to get calls. Oh, we would love to have your band play our festival. Oh, here's the price. Oh, we can't do that. So eventually I said, you know what? I have a sextet. And they said, oh, really? Okay. Well, that's a little cheaper. And so the first gig I took, I only had the three charts that were on that first album. And so but I had several months, and I wrote enough charts to have, a full program. And then the band kind of just started sailing forward from that moment.
And the very first lineup, let's say go back to Hit the Bricks, it's not necessarily the same lineup we're going to hear today.
No.
It was quite a different personnel. There was one mainstay, though, your trumpet player, Scott Wendholt.
Scott Wendholt, yeah. And Scott has also played in my big band for many, many years.
Right.
And Dave Radicek, my drummer, who was on all of my big band albums through 2014.
And Woody's band. You knew him on Woody Herman.
And Woody's band, and I knew him from Eastman. So that was pretty special. And on that first album, Allen Farnham is the pianist, who's on all but one of my big band albums. Mm-hmm. And I used Rufus Reid. Actually, the original idea for the album, it was going to be the trio that played behind Stan Getz on that famous album from Carnegie Hall. Was Kenny Barron and Rufus Reid and Victor Lewis. But the label had issues with management from one of the players. I'm not going to mention who.
Yeah.
But so that ended up getting scrapped. But we had already signed Rufus. So, and I love the way he plays. So,
sure.
And he had played with Alan before. He had never played with Dave on drums, but I was confident that would be a nice trio. And then I had Scott play trumpet, and the tenor sax player was Chris Potter on that particular album. And since then, after that, Rick Margitza played tenor for us for a while, but the same rhythm section, but with David Finck playing bass. And then Rick moved to Paris, and Walt Weiskopf has been with the group for quite some time now, playing with us probably over 10, 15 years. So it's Scott and Walt, and Alan and Dave, and after Dave Radicek passed away, Eric Halvorson is our drummer, who was actually recommended by Dave Radicek, and he's exemplary.
He's killing.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting is that you in some ways learn to really write big band music very, very well, almost on the fly in a way.
Yeah.
You did have that year with Ray Wright and some studies, but then you're also like trying things out on Woody's band and rehearsing short passages to hear what it sounds like. The three-horn thing, although it's a lot less horns, when you started writing for that formation, just three horns with a rhythm section, I don't know if you had written anything before Hit the Bricks for three horns. So was that a learning experience for you? Because I know it has some challenges.
Yeah, it still is a learning experience. I mean, with a big band, you have plenty of horns to include all the notes if you want,
right?
All the notes in the whole scale. But with three horns, you're limited to three, so it's got to be the right three. Right. And I kind of learned how to write for a trio or for three horns the same way I did for big band, and the same way I learned how to improvise is just kind of figuring it out through examples of things that I like to hear. So all those great sextets, from Blakey to George Russell to, you name it, all these groups, and quintets too, like the certain sonorities they can get from three or even two horns is really kind of a special thing. So I think over the course of the 20 years the band's been together, things have evolved in that respect as far as the sounds I'm able to get out of these smaller group of musicians.
Yeah, and it's a very typical lineup too, because it works so well to have trumpet, tenor sax, and trombone, which is historically a very famous lineup.
Yeah, but also though, they're all kind of within a register that you can almost flip them, interchange them. Who's on top, who's in the middle, who's on the bottom. So that can create some other sounds as well.
But it's cool because when I hear your sextet, I think to myself of the lineage of other sextets historically in the past. Either I hear total uniqueness of you, or I might hear things that are inspired by other records that I've heard in the past. So if any of our audience members out there who are familiar with people like Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, or Benny Goldsman's Jazz Tet, or I mean, if you think of some of these groups, Slide Hampton had a great recording with Dexter.
Of course.
Three Horns, one of my favorite records.
In Copenhagen.
Yeah, I know you love that record.
Yeah.
And
there's some great recordings. George Russell with three horns, David Baker playing trombone, really fantastic stuff. And even some more modernists like somebody like Randy Brecker, who uses like a triadic harmony with foreign bass notes, or seemingly foreign bass notes, but the triad creates kind of a sonority. All those things, they're all, I'm influenced by all those, so I try to not cherry pick. It just all kind of goes into the same pile of stuff that I choose from, and hopefully they all make sense when I write something.
Yeah, you don't necessarily put on your Art Blakey Messenger hat, and you don't put on your Benny Gold.
Yeah, and that was one thing I really wanted to make sure not to do with this group, is have it be a group that's kind of derivative or, imitative. I just wanted it to have its own personality.
And you've been writing it long enough and been an artist long enough that you didn't have to necessarily do that. You could just really write from your intuition and from your heart and from your creative heart, not necessarily.
I mean, there's one particular tune on the new album that's obviously inspired by Blakey, but harmonically and voicing wise, it's not at all coming out of the bassy thing at all. It actually might be coming more out of Randy Brecker than any of those other things. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition where you can create this sound that reminds you of something, and yeah, it does, but it's not quite that,
Right. There was another group I was familiar with, and not a lot of people are necessarily. It's kind of like a jazz fusion group that was the predecessor band to the Brecker Brothers. It did have it had Randy and Mike Brecker, but it also had a trombonist named
Barry Rogers. Yeah.
The group called Dreams.
Dreams, yeah.
And they did some wild stuff, clearly.
Yeah.
But they were a three-horn lineup, so there's like, Chicago. It's Chicago, the pop group.
Sure, of course, yeah.
That's three horns.
Yeah.
Is that the same trombone, trumpet, and is it tenor sax or?
It's tenor, but sometimes soprano. Yeah.
Sometimes soprano. So it's a malleable group, Yeah, I like it. I find it challenging too, because you have to pick the right notes, like you say. You can get kind of a big sound, but you have to carefully mask the fact that you're missing a
and you really have to trust your pianist to provide what you're not providing in the arrangement.
Correct.
So you have to be diligent about what information you give him, so everything's taken care of.
Right, because the horns by themselves will not do that.
Right.
It's almost easier to write for 4 or 5 horns than it is for 3.
Of course. Yeah.
It's just everything's waiting for you there. Well, anyway, we have an hour-long set starting in about 10 minutes of your music, and do you want to say this is all music from? We should say, and you should say if you like.
Sure.
A CD release engagement.
Yeah, this is a celebration of an album we recorded that came out in July, in the midst of COVID. We recorded it at the end of October in 2019, and things come up at the end of the year. We didn't have any gigs in December, and then I went traveling in January through basically up until March.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back and it was like, nope, nobody's playing. And we had the release date set for the album. We had jazz clubs and we had jazz festivals we were going to be playing. We were going to be traveling abroad. Everything just got stopped. So the record label asked me, do you want to postpone the release of the album? And I thought, you know what, this is the perfect time to release an album. Everything I've seen, everybody's posting online, is the one thing that's keeping them sane is being able to listen to music And there wasn't a lot of new things out there. And anything that was new was like kind of home recordings, kind of not professional level recordings. And I thought this is the perfect time to release it, because it's, you know, something by a band that rehearsed together in person and recorded in a recording studio, and you know, by a professional recording engineer, and mixed, and you know, all, you know, I'm really happy with the final product. So I thought this would be a great time to release it, even though we don't have the gigs to promote it right now. It turned out that all the national radio stations kind of ran with it, because it was something new and fresh, and there wasn't a lot out there that was getting people excited about anything because of the pandemic. So this gig at William Paterson will be our first time playing together since we left that recording studio.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So it's going to be a lot of fun, because I wrote the music about 5 months before the record date. I did an artist retreat at a place called Yaddo in upstate New York. And I came back to New York, and we had some rehearsals, and we did a couple gigs at Smalls in New York City to kind of work it all out and kind of feel out how this music was going to come together. And then we went right into the studio, and it just went smooth as butter. There's 8 tunes on the album. We started the session at 11 a.m. and everybody was done at 5 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it just went. We did 2 takes of everything. And everything, wow. And just everything was just like really smooth and natural and organic. So I couldn't have been happier with that.
Sounds like the band was very familiar with the music.
Yeah, I mean, we had rehearsed it, we had performed it live, you know, 4 sets of it live, and then everyone had the music. We had talked about it in person. You know, it's nowadays everything's over the internet, and you kind of have to trust that the person understands what you're doing, but they're not going to actually be playing with you when you're doing these remote recordings. So it was an ideal thing. So we're really excited.
I need to wrap things up a little bit. We have a couple of minutes, and I just wanted to say that, well, it sounds like from what you just said, this is really recent music. I mean, it was recorded just a couple of months, 3 months or so before the pandemic shut everything down. So this is extremely current music.
Yeah.
Even though there's we had to wait, of course, until this point, but it's within the year. So in my mind, this is still very fresh music, very current. It doesn't seem like it's too long after your recording to call this a CD release celebration. So
of course,
we're grateful that you're choosing the William Paterson Jazz Room series to make your performance also a CD release celebration for this.
Well, we're also very thankful that you chose us, because primarily because we want to play, but also since, you know, I've been sitting on this music, the band's been sitting on this music for a year now, and everybody's just so excited to play together that I guarantee something special is going to happen when we hit that stage.
Into the Shadows, Summit Records, the John Fedchock New York Sextet. We're going to be hearing from you in just a few minutes. So John, I'm going to close up shop and just say thanks for spending some time here in our Sittin' In. You were sitting in, and hopefully the folks who knew something about you know a lot more about you and are a little more informed about what they're about to hear in about 10 minutes or so. And they'll continue following your music and career. So
great, Pete. Thank you.